Good evening. I'm Pete Chema, Majority Leader of the Yonkers City Council, Council Member of District 2, and I'd like to introduce you to our weekly show, District by District. Today I have with me Sergeant Peter Chema, head of the Yonkers Forensics Laboratory, located here in the Case Criminal Justice Building. Today we're going to talk a little bit about forensic science and take a look at the new facility here in the Case Center. Welcome to the show, Pete.
How you doing, Pete?
Okay.
Good afternoon.
Just recently, the City of Yonkers has moved its forensics laboratory from across the street in the old Health Center building here to the new facility in the Case Center. We have a very modern forensics laboratory with some of the state-of-art of the equipment that is being used currently in forensic science. And I would like to ask Sergeant Chema a little about what his laboratory looks like here in the building. Pete?
Well, as you know, we recently moved over to the Case Justice Center a few weeks ago from our old location at the Health Center building. And so definitely the surrounding area is much more beautiful than it was before. We find it much more comfortable and convenient to work. So why don't we
go on in
and take a look at the lab?
Great, come on, join us inside. Okay, Pete, yeah, is this obviously a special revolving door?
Yeah, it's a rotating door that allows us to enter and exit the darkroom without exposing any photographic negatives.
Oh, let's take a look. Oh.
Well, here we are inside the darkroom. And here we perform photography using a copy stand, as well as developing the negatives themselves. And then after the negatives have been developed, we have photographic enlarger. It's a type of enlarger that allows you to use various formats of negatives. For example, 35 millimeter, 4-inch by 5-inch negatives, and so on.
So we do our own, so you do your own developing on the premises?
Yeah, well, certain kinds of photography, that is, forensic photography, really requires that the forensic scientist that's involved with the case actually do some of the photography himself.
Pete, I can see this laboratory is really set up for developing enlarging of the photographs, and there obviously is no windows, so thus the dark room.
And we even have the photographic safety lights built into the ceiling, so that you can work very conveniently. It's much more convenient than our prior location. We had a lot of difficulties over there with light leaks and water leaks and so forth, and it just wasn't actually built as a photographic darkroom to begin with. It was built about 50 years ago. So finally we're in a situation where we have a dedicated darkroom, which makes things quite a bit easier.
Great. Well, I can see it's done the right way. Ventilation is great. Everything you feel up in here, you know, darkroom, you don't get that closed sense, which is fantastic. So, all right, we're ready to proceed into other parts of the lab and enter back out the Chamber of Darkness. Okay, see you in the other parts. So this is your first office as you enter the laboratory,
yes.
And this is your office file?
Yeah, part of it, yeah.
This is a data station which contains all our records of every case that comes into the laboratory. It's been in operation for approximately 2 years. And in here, under each year, is a sequential record of every case that comes in. For example, if we're going to search a case, we just go in through here, indicate a random case, and just search it. It would give us a particular serial number, which would be a reference to every single case that comes through the police department. In addition to that, who the detective was, if the detective unit made an arrest, they would have a number, narcotics, date of arrest, and then the reference, 6 references are given for different accomplices. And the date received, the date it was opened, the analysts who did the case, and the date it was finished. And also an information with the case would be the number of items that would be in there.
And here we have the various drugs. I guess this is the drug file.
Well, this is a general file, and here we
General
also
file.
have the drugs on the top line here, the first three. We have latents, other fields for other things.
Okay, so you have the-
Hypodermics, homicide, burglary, rape, hit and runs, and we have a special note area for any information that has been relayed to us.
And maybe you could explain how we use that in practice in terms of what casework is needed in a particular week and so forth.
Right, on a particular week, we'll start off on Monday. Each case is given a request date. For example, a DA will call us or send us a notification that a particular case is needed for that week. And what we'll do is we'll enter that information to the computer. Now this may be a month in advance or a couple weeks in advance. At the beginning of that week, we'll search everything that's requested for that week. So we have a hit list of things and jobs to be completed for that 1 week.
Certain things take a priority when I guess they're due in court. You have to have your analyzation of the particular drug or crime, if it's a crime done by that time.
That's right.
You know what I noticed, Kirby? I just would like to ask you. I see three of the most common drugs is cocaine, heroin, and marijuana, but what about crack? It's such a fairly common substance now. Where do you file that?
Well, crack is cocaine. It's just a different form of it. Normally, crack is a cocaine-free base as compared to the cocaine which is used for snorting, which is probably the hydrochloric base. And that's more prevalent. So under the penal law, it's classified as cocaine. And just to make our information the same, we just keep cocaine on listed there. And these are the common drugs that we pick up at the laboratory. Heroin, which is increasing in number now, and our marijuana, which has been constant throughout the opening of the laboratory.
I'd like to continue a little further into the lab and show us a little more.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Kirby. So what do we have here?
Well, Pete, I'd like to introduce you to Candace Salvato.
Hi, Candace. Nice to meet you.
This is Councilman Chema. Candace has been with our laboratory for a few months now in the capacity of a forensic scientist. Previously, Candace had interned with our laboratory from the John Jay College Forensic Science Program.
She looks like you're in the middle of an experiment.
Yes, I'm about to do a preliminary test for crack cocaine. And what we do is, first we do what's called the color test. And we just add a very small bit of sample to these reagents. It's very sensitive for the cane family. And we just see if it's typical of a cocaine sample.
Seems to be turning blue.
Yes, that's very typical of the cane family, particularly cocaine. And then we do what's called a crystal test, and we examine this slide under a microscope for the crystals that are typical of cocaine. And then after the preliminary test, we'll do what's called a confirmatory test. At least this way we know that we're going in the right direction in the next step for our examination.
So the preliminary actually is a two-pronged study.
Yes, yes it is. This way, if anything is not typical, then we know that we must look for something else, or we have an idea that something is wrong with the sample. Maybe it's cut, or maybe it's not cocaine at all.
And these are the vials that they were found in, or
Yes, these are the typical vials that crack cocaine that they sold in, and that's how we received it.
I've seen in the streets, you know, in my tours of drug-infested areas, vials that look differently. There's several different vials they sell them in, but they're all small, about that size, and you can see they're not very large at all.
That's right.
And that's it. What is that sold on the street for? That amount of drug?
Probably $5 or $10. But you know, this is a little different than the usual crack vials. Notice that it's sort of a bullet shape or a torpedo shape. In the past, most of the kinds of vials we see are flat on the bottom, which you can actually stand up.
Now, what do we have from this? As I see, does that mean it is part of the cane family or some derivative of cocaine?
Very typical of the cane
Very
family.
typical.
Yes, it turns blue. And the crystals that we will examine, very indicative of cocaine. We call them rods with perpendicular arms. If we see that, we have a very good idea that it is cocaine.
Well, you have, I guess, very high. How high does the magnification have to be in the microscope?
Most of the time we use 10x, but we can go up to at least 100x on the older microscopes.
Here you can see a vault door, and this is our vault, and it's a very secure area for where we keep our cases while they're in progress until they eventually go back to the property clerk's office. And we also have, as you can see, a very good alarm system.
Oh, this is the alarm system in conjunction with the vault, in case
Yes.
anyone got the wrong idea.
Yeah.
And you can see it's a very secure vault door.
If they somehow manage to get through this door, they would trip the alarm system.
Now, in there are primarily or strictly drug samples? Is that just drugs in that thing? or
No,
other evidence?
we keep other kinds of evidence in there as well.
All right.
It's
And
a good size.
how large is it? Large?
It's about a 10 by 10.
Okay, regulations prohibit us from going inside, of
Right.
course. This is top off limits, so we won't go any further other than to say that it looks very secure, and certainly I'm sure that's where everything is. So we'll move on to where the experiments happen.
Also, Candace, why don't you explain to Councilor Chema what you're doing on this case?
Okay, we received this evidence, and when we received the print was barely visible. And it was a print on material in dust. What we did was, we experimented in the darkroom with different types of lighting, different types of high contrast film, and also we experimented with exposure times on camera, how long we would let the light come into the camera and allow the picture to develop. Then what we did, we took the actual sneakers and we made an impression on this roll of transport paper, making sure that we got all the details from heel to toe.
This you can't see as a sneaker, but this is so very clear. I don't know if the camera can pick it up. That's a something made off of this initial.
Yeah, that's what well, no, this is
the
made from the
actual
sneaker
sneaker.
itself.
Oh.
Whereas the other one is what we refer to as a question pattern that came from the crime scene.
So you have to fit the actual shoe print.
Yeah, well, we actually do a point-by-point comparison, which can be done side by side or by actually superimposing the two items together.
And of course, this evidence, once you do this calculation to match it, that would be considered conclusive evidence in court.
Well, it can be. If there are individual features in the sneaker, as well as in the pattern found at the crime scene, then yes, it is possible to make a positive identification. But very often the case is that the medium that the footprint is deposited on is not a good recording. For example, in this particular case, it was a pillow. And while we did see some evidence of a footprint there, it wasn't a very good recording medium.
Sometimes they can be more conclusive.
Yeah, for example, on a piece of paper or blood on a floor and so forth.
And this is a result of the work in the darkroom.
Yeah.
We visited.
And the type of work that Candace did, which is utilizing this material known as Codolith, it's actually a negative material normally, but we use it as a positive. And what this does is allow us to bring out various details through contrast enhancement. Okay, we have other examples of footprint cases that you might be interested in. For example, this is a photograph of a footprint in blood that our unit found in Metro North Railroad Station a couple of years back in a homicide case. And after a suspect was arrested, we obtained his sneakers and we made what is known as an exemplar. Again, this is a test impression of the suspect's shoe. And then I was able to compare that to the impression in blood found at the crime scene. And in this particular case, I was able to make a positive identification associating the suspect's sneaker with the footprint located at the crime scene.
And was that the case of the murder newsstand dealer?
Yes, it
I
was.
recall. And the gentleman that was convicted and is away now.
Yeah, I think he received about 40 years of jail.
Right.
Here again is another homicide case that I have worked on. This is a photograph of a portion of a long playing record. And you can see a portion of a footwear pattern deposited on it. The suspect in this particular case stepped on some dust in the room and then stepped onto the record. And as you know, records like to collect static, they're very static and they like to collect dust. and it made a good recording medium for this particular footprint.
That's crystal clear.
Here is an exemplar, a test impression I made from the suspect sneaker, and found many individual points of comparison. Again, was able to make a positive identification.
Sergeant Pizzola, I happen to notice the blood splatterings or drippings, and I know that that's one of your points that you concentrate on is forensics having to deal with blood and the way blood can fall and actually influence a case. If you explain some of that to us.
Well, I actually did my master's thesis on that particular topic, and well, as you know, blood can be very important in terms of blood chemistry, that is group A, group B, and so forth, in terms of associating a particular individual to a crime scene. For example, we're hearing a lot about DNA nowadays. But an often overlooked aspect of blood evidence is the shape of the patterns themselves and the distribution of the various stains. And so, for example, you can look at a group of blood stains and give some indication as to how the stains were caused. That is, whether a result of a gunshot wound, whether a result of a bludgeoning, beating, and so forth. And you can look at the individual stains. For example, I don't know if you can see this. This is a typical blood stain that we find at a crime scene. And you'll notice that it has a very elliptical area to it and also a distorted tip. Well, in this particular case, the blood came in from the left and traveled to the right. So we can look at that, we can tell what the direction of travel is of the drop of blood that resulted in the blood stain. And also from an examination of the diameters of this ellipse, using trigonometric functions, we can estimate the approximate angle of incidence. And if we look at a lot of stains like this at a crime scene, we can get an idea as to how far off the floor someone was struck by a weapon, how far away out from a wall, what approximate angle, and so on. So it becomes very useful information in terms of reconstructing a crime scene, to corroborate an alibi or to indicate that there is some problem with an alibi, statements of witnesses, and so forth.
Well, it's very interesting to see just how much it takes to really skin a cat sometimes out there. But you look like you're ready for anything here in the lab.
Well, we try to be prepared.
Yes, what is this interesting looking contraption?
Basically, this is a fish tank, and we utilize this for developing fingerprints. For example, if we want to develop fingerprints on a difficult subject to work with, such as a metal can like this, which has a glossy kind of paper around it, we can develop fingerprints quite readily on an item like this. And what we'll do is we'll take a beaker such as this, place a common household item in it called crazy glue or super glue, place a small quantity in the beaker, insert the beaker onto a hot plate as you see in there, and then we'll take the item we want to develop fingerprints on, put it back into the tank, cover this up, and then we'll turn the hot plate on. And after a few moments, the super glue will begin to heat. It will release this chemical vapor known as cyanoacrylate, and it will coat the item, and it'll be attracted to any fingerprint residues that are on it. So this becomes a very rapid technique, which is obviously inexpensive, to develop fingerprints on surfaces which are difficult to work with ordinary dust.
Well, that's very innovative. What did they use before super glue?
Well, there really wasn't a very good alternative. This was developed, I guess, about 8 years ago by the Japanese, and what obviously is a very cheap way of going is also a very good one.
That's incredible. It's good to see we can make our own equipment too when we need it. Let's move on to the computer room. What is this machine, Bergie?
This is the gas chromatograph ion trap detector, commonly called GCMS or mass spec. What it does is it samples. This has an auto sampler on it, so it samples our sample even while we're not here. So we can set this up at the end of the day and just let it run, working overnight. Come back the next morning, pull out all the data that we have for our cases. what we'll do is we'll take a little vial like this and fill it up with a solvent and a drug or a component that we want to identify. Place it in here like that, okay? And then place it in here. This is called an auto sampler tray. Place that in there, make the connections, and what will happen is it'll keep turning. The computer will take control. It'll keep turning until it gets to the vial that has to be sampled, and then it'll automatically take care of it and sample it. What happens with this particular instrument, once it's sampled, it will take the liquid, run it through a gas chromatograph, and that will do will separate all the components, and then run it through the ITD, the ion trap detector. So what it'll do is we will get a chromatogram very similar to the one up there, right in the middle. You can see that where all the lines are coming to. And different components will come off, and we'll get what is called a total ion chromatograph. And then each point for each peak is basically a different compound coming off. What the mass spec does, it bombards it with electrons, okay? And it fragments the compound in different pieces. So we get a fragmentation pattern like that. If you can zoom in, you can see the sample here titled propane. This one is titled propane. Over here, benzocaine, lidocaine. And these are comparisons that we'll do.
So you get various graphs that are standards?
Right.
Compared to?
That we have on our library, on our computer here. And then we'll compare our unknowns to those. And we'll also compare them to literature. We'll also compare them to our known drugs that we have here.
Kirby, how many compounds are on that library?
It's in excess of 30,000, I believe.
Wow.
Well, this is certainly looks to me like the very much state-of-the-art equipment. This is all new?
This is all fairly new. It's, I think the laboratory just picked it up back in May. And it's state-of-the-art equipment, including a computer that takes all that information. It's so much information is given off in this instrument at one time that there's nothing else except the computer that can pick up that information. And we have a sample running now on this test sample. And you can see here each time a dot is put on the screen, that's a full scan that's taken on something that's coming off.
And this can work all night?
Yeah, we can set, that's right, we can set this up and it'll run right through over the weekend while we're not here. And should anything happen to the system, whether we lose power or any malfunctions, this instrument here will keep a record of it on a special file, and it'll come up. Also, this instrument here, okay, will let us know too that there's been a disruption.
Now, would this be used primarily in drug cases or in any kind of case where you're trying to identify a certain substance?
Okay. Primarily in forensic use, it's used about 99% of the time for drug identification. Although different sections in forensic science are using it, arson analysis. Anytime you have a component that you want to identify, this is the instrument to use. We have it available. It's been online for a while, and as we get more accustomed to using it here, it'll be used for just about everything.
Great, great. I'll tell you, very impressive equipment and a very impressive job here.
Okay, Pete, to my left here we have a Fourier transform infrared spectrometer. This is used for drug identification. Unlike the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer that we were talking about a little earlier, this particular one does not separate the compounds out for you. So you have to have the drugs in a relatively pure state before you can actually analyze them. But what this does provide is a quote-unquote fingerprint of the compound. So if you look at those charts up there, for example, one is a known source of cocaine or crack, and the one above it is a street sample, if you will. And you can see that the peaks correspond very well. And that is, again, a fingerprint of the compound.
Oh.
What basically occurs in this system is we'll take a clear sample, which is like in the form of a window, the stuff we want to analyze,
Right.
and we'll put it into the instrument. Then we will tell the instrument to send infrared radiation through it. And we want to see the result on the screen. So this will actually send...
Oh, I just saw a change. Is that
yeah.
the new print?
Well, it's actually conducting the examination now. It's sending in a large quantity of infrared radiation through the sample. And each drug will exhibit a different infrared spectrum, which is the charts that you see up here. For example, this is a infrared spectrum of a plastic known as polystyrene. And you can see that that is considerably different from the charts up above. In this particular instrument, if we're also questioning what sample we have present, that is, if we don't immediately recognize it, we have on computer disks a library of about 1,500 various pharmaceuticals that we can search through. So it's a very powerful technique.
And what is this instrument here?
All right, to your right, some of the instruments that you can and cannot see there collectively are known as a high-performance liquid chromatograph. And with that particular instrument, we can perform a quantitative analysis on crack. In current New York State law, the penal law that is, a certain quantity of crack, 500 milligrams of a pure amount of crack, is a low-level felony. And so we have to prove how much actually pure material is present in a given sample. So is it 30%, is it 40%, and so forth. And this particular piece of equipment allows us to do that.
So you can put an entire sample in there, a certain...
Yeah, well, we'll
quantity?
take a drug exhibit, maybe 30 or 40 vials of crack. We will take all the powder out of the vials and dilute it with a solution, put it into this instrument. We have also an auto sampling device for this one. We can load about 100 samples into that at a particular time, and it will automatically go through an injection mechanism.
And it'll give you the quantity of the pure drug.
And then we will get charts that come off this instrument, and we'll compare that against known samples that we've injected, and that's how we calculate what the quantity of crack is in a particular sample. That can be used for other drugs, such as LSD and so on.
Well, Pete, I thought it would be very interesting for the viewers out there in the city of Yonkers to know what we have in the police lab, and that we do have an active, viable, and up-to-date modern forensic facility.
Yes, we do.
And I'm quite glad you're the man heading it up.
Thank you.
We're very proud of your accomplishments, your master's degree, going for the doctorate. And where do you see the direction of the lab heading when we expand?
I think we could look forward to expanding services somewhat. For example, we have received a grant from New York State for about $30,000, which will allow us to attach a microscope to this particular system. So, for example, if at a crime scene we find a fiber that we would like to compare against a suspect's clothing, we can take that fiber, put it under the microscope, and obtain an infrared spectrum of that particular fiber, one strand. And so you can also use this for other trace evidence. For example, paint comparisons. In a hit and run, for example, you might find paint on one car that was transferred from another car. And so we'll be able to look at that paint and say if that paint came from a car of that type. Or if we don't have a suspect's car, and we just want to get a hint as to what kind of car the police department should be looking for, we can scan the infrared spectrum, get an idea of what kind of car, what color, what year, make, and so forth, by looking at a standard reference file from the National Bureau of Standards, and give the police an idea as to what kind of car to look for. And then that'll go out on state or national teletype services, and this is how you investigate cases.
Great. Maybe in the next few months when more equipment comes in, we can come here and update our district-to-district report. Sure. I'd like to thank you very much for joining me here.
Thank you.
Once again, I'm Councilman Peter Chema, on site here in the Police Forensics Laboratory, and my guest this week was Peter Pizzola, Sergeant and head of the Yonkers Forensics Police Laboratory. I would like to invite the audience to tune in on a weekly basis to District by District, which is a show brought to you by your council members, where we like to bring items of interest to you, our community.
Thank you for joining me this week, and I'd like to say again, thanks to my guest, Pete Pizzola. Thank you, Sarge.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.